What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we're going to talk about what I'm seeing in the comic market, the trends across the different comic ages, and what I'm seeing with sales performance for the big titles. So stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So I said I wanted to try to do these a little more often, maybe once every couple weeks or so. So it's been about 2 weeks since my last video. So I wanted to give an update on what I have seen since then. Now, don't worry, this video shouldn't be quite as long because I don't have to go over all the time from the prior videos that I hadn't put out. So hopefully we can go over things just a little bit quicker on this one. Now, if you're not familiar, what I do, where I get this data from, is I watch the weekly Heritage Comic Auction, and I evaluate about 200 key comics per week across all kinds of different ages. So I've got gold, silver, bronze, modern. I estimate their value, and I track their high sales. And from that, I determine different kind of metrics so that I can see how the comic market has been performing over time, because we've seen some really interesting changes this year, since earlier this year when we saw big spikes in prices, and now a lot of titles we've been seeing coming down, but we're also seeing some pockets of strength. So talking about all those kinds of different things. Now, I started watching these sales back in March when we started seeing all these big price shifts. I had been pricing books for years, but I hadn't been keeping all the data until I realized now that this was something that was kind of fun and interesting to see. So I've got 3 different charts that I'm going to go over. They've all got some different useful information on them. The first chart is just going to be some general metrics, some performance in the comic market. The second chart is going to be the percent of sales that go above my estimates, broken out between the gold, silver, bronze, and modern ages, so you can see how the different ages of books are performing against one another. And the last one is going to be the percent of new highs, where we get new highs broken out by age again, comparing the gold, silver, bronze, and modern ages to see, again, how they're performing against one another. So with that, let's get to the first chart. So this first one, we've got the general metrics, so what I call kind of the general comic performance over the last, it's about 8 months now, going back to March. And I've got 4 different sets of data on this chart. It's 4 different lines, and I use averages now to help smooth things out a bit. It makes it a little easier to follow. The blue line is the percent of sales that went above my estimates. The red line are the percent of sales that had new highs within that grade for that book. The green line are the percent of sales that went 20% or more above my estimates, so the really strong kind of outliers. And then the purple is the percent of sales that went 20% or more below my estimate, so the really weak outliers. So with the blue line, the important thing there is if I continuously see numbers above 50%, that means more books than less are selling above my estimates. So to me, week after week, if I'm seeing these strong sales, above 50% of those sales going above my estimates, that's telling me that week after week we're seeing continuous strength. You can see back in that April, May, June timeframe, consistently above 50%, but then it's been trending down since then. And within the last couple weeks, it has continued with that trend, and we are now below 40%. So that means 60% of the sales are selling for below my estimate. So if everything is steady state, just kind of I'd call it like a normal market, I would expect things to be hovering right around 50%, assuming I'm doing a decent job estimating the prices of these books. And I've priced thousands and thousands of books, and so I'm pretty confident in my numbers. So if I'm seeing numbers where they're consistently below 50%, it's telling me things are a little weak. And if I'm seeing numbers consistently above 50%, it's going to tell me things are strong, and right at that 50% level, it's even. And like you can see here, we are consistently below 50% and quite a bit now down around that 40% or even a little less. Now, the red line, what this is the one I like to look at for kind of a general overall market strength. This is the percentage of new highs. And so if you see lots of new highs, that tells you things are very strong. You're exceeding prior market highs for those books. And if you see less new highs, it tells you you're either in a flat market or you're in a weak market. Because you could potentially have a flat market and books are all just selling for around the same price. You're not going to be setting new records all the time. So just because those numbers are down doesn't necessarily say that things are weak. But if you look at that combined with some of these other numbers, it gives you a more complete picture. And like you can see earlier this year, we were having those numbers where over 50% of sales were having new highs, which is just crazy. Just kind of an incredible number to see that many new highs. And that's obviously, you can see, dropped significantly since earlier this year. And you can see it's continued to trend down over the last couple of weeks, and we have now crossed below the 20% mark. So less than 20% of books hitting new highs. And as you'll see later, a significant number of those are in the golden age. So we have pretty low percentage of books that are hitting new highs right now. But like I said, this number continuing to go down doesn't necessarily mean the comic market is dropping. It just means that you aren't having those new highs. You could be in a flat market. But combine that with what I saw, or what you can see with the sales averaging less than my estimates, that does tell you we are, in my opinion, in a weaker comic market right now. Now, like I've mentioned in some other videos, especially my top 10 type videos, I am seeing pockets of strength though. And so it's not like everything is down, just the big differences from earlier this year where everything was up. Now it's very targeted. So you'll see strength around speculation on certain shows or certain movies or character announcements, that kind of thing. And you'll see spikes in prices of those books. You'll see new highs in prices of those books, but you're not seeing that across the board high. Now, the last two lines I'm going to talk about on this chart are the green and purple lines. And I've mentioned the reason I like these is because they really show that generally most books are selling right around what I would call the fair market value, or what my estimate is for the price of that book. Because you can see it's about 35 to 40% of the books fall into this range of greater than 20% or less than 20%, but that means that 60 to 65% are selling within 20% of that estimated value. And so if you think of it like a $100 book, that means that if it goes up for sale, 60 to 65% of the time, that $100 book is selling for between 80 and 120. And then that other 35 to 40% of the time, it might get outside of that range. And so most of the time, you're going to have it falling within that range. The thing that I think is really interesting here is that with that purple line, where those are the weak sales, the ones that are selling for 20% or more below that fair market value. This is where I've talked about around this time of year, around the holidays, Christmas, auctions can be a time to pick up some books for some great deals because people are buying gifts, all that other kind of thing. And so they may not be focusing on the auctions, spending time watching them or having the money to spend on them. And so you can definitely get some deals right now, and you can see that percentage of books, that purple line, going up. And so you're having a more likely chance to pick up some of those books for a good price. Now, I will say this last week, so the 12/19 that's not on this chart did look pretty strong, but definite weakness the 2 weeks that I've looked at here. And so that's why I like to buy books around this time of year. I've definitely been picking up some books, if you've seen from my unboxings, because if I get the opportunity to buy them at a discount, especially with keys, it just doesn't come up all that often. And so to me, you got to jump at those opportunities, and that's what I like to do at this time of year. So just remember, maybe that's something that if you're planning out, if there's books that you're looking for, if you save some money up specifically to pick up a book, look around this time of year, and so that you can use that money to find that key that you're trying to buy. So just this is something that you can see not just in Heritage, but you can see it in Comic Link, Comic Connect, Hakes, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. When people are looking to sell books, they want money for Christmas or whatever it might be. This is the time that you have a chance to maybe get some of those at that discount. All right, now let's look at the next couple charts, and these are some of my favorites. It's where we've got them broken out by the ages, so gold, silver, bronze, and modern. And I've mentioned this before, but just in case this is the first time you're watching this video, I break these out based on how Heritage breaks them out, because that's kind of what I have to do. And so for gold, silver, and bronze, it's pretty standard. It's 1938 to 1955, 1956 to 1969, and 1970 to 1979. But modern for heritage is 1980 and above. There's nothing for copper, so just be aware that that's what falls into that modern range. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about here is the percent of sales exceeding my estimates. And this one to me is very important combined with the new highs, because you can see here that Golden Age has really separated itself from the other ages. The other ones are all generally around the same numbers. You can see I talked about that big separation we saw earlier this year with the Silver Age, where the Silver Age dropped quite a bit, performing very poorly from all the way back around April through July. And it took it a while before it started catching back up to Bronze and Modern. But you can see Golden Age continues to be strong. You have some variation week after week. You have little ups and downs, but it's really been hovering around that 60 to 65% mark, and it has continued to do so. So Golden Age every week has been 50% or more, so just consistently exceeding my estimates, which is just a very strong sign for the Golden Age, whereas all the other ages for most of this year have just been below 50%. In reality, the only one that was above 50% was the Bronze Age since I started tracking back in April and early May. And so everything else has generally been pretty weak, has been on a downtrend since then in terms of performance, but Golden Age has been the big outlier. That's the one where I've been talking about how the strength in pre-code horror, the strength in the big hero titles like Superman and Action Comics, Detective Comics, Batman, those kinds of things. They're just, the demand for them has been very high. And I think people are just more and more realizing that these books just are pretty uncommon. There aren't a lot of them out there. And so when they come up for sale, they're paying premiums for them. So my general takeaways from this chart is that Golden Age continues to be strong. It's around 60 to 65%, regularly beating my estimates, always above that 50% mark, whereas every other age has been underperforming. Bronze and Silver seem to continue to be trending down. Modern's been jumping around a bit, but in general below that 50%, so underperforming. All right, now let's look at the percentage of sales that are new highs. And this is one where they do break out how I would expect. You've got gold on the top, then silver, then basically bronze and modern. And the reason for that is that just they don't sell as often. Gold doesn't sell as often as silver, doesn't sell as often as bronze, as modern. And so you're more likely to have new highs with those. And so that's why this chart on its own doesn't necessarily say a lot. But combining it with the fact that the Golden Age books are exceeding my estimates and having such a significant percentage of new highs, those two pieces of information together continue to tell me that Golden Age is just very strong. Now, you can see just a little bit of a step down over the last couple of weeks with the Golden Age, and Bronze, Silver, and Modern have leveled off a bit over the last couple of weeks. But still, Golden Age way overperforming, up around that 60% mark. It's been hovering around 70%, just bouncing around in that area. So yeah, Golden Age has been a little weaker over the last couple of weeks, which is not a huge surprise, again, considering where I've seen this is when you can get those discounts on books. But still very strong in comparison to all the other ages, and still generally hovering around that 60 to 70% level. Now, I've mentioned this in the prior videos as well. I don't know what the normal baseline would be because I started watching this back in April when the comic market was already spiking. So say we had the ability to look back in 2020 to see where things were hovering around in 2020, or say early 2020 when the comic market was really tanking. It would be interesting to be able to see that comparison, but unfortunately I don't have that data. And so what I'll do is I will just continue to keep watching this and see where everything starts to level off. It really does seem like Golden Age hovers around the 60 to 70% mark, and now we're starting to see some flattening in the Silver, Bronze, and Modern. So we'll definitely just have to watch that and see if this is where they level off, and then that'll give us a good view of if things start to pick up again, if you start to see deviations from those levels. But in general, I really like this chart. I think it's a really interesting one. Big takeaways to me are that Golden Age has remained consistently high around that 60 to 70% as the rest of the market has been trending down. You can see that red is the average. It's been trending down all year. Golden Age has stayed relatively flat. And then we've got the silver, bronze, and modern that throughout the year have also trended down. Maybe they're leveling off a little bit now. It's hard to tell. It's only been a few weeks of data, so we'll just have to see how things continue as we move on into the new year. Now, I also like to touch a little bit on my sales data so you can see maybe something from my perspective as somebody that sells books. So November was my strongest sales month. I think the most total sales I've had ever, and the second best in terms of performance of sales. Now, December has definitely dropped off from that, and that's not a surprise. That's what I would normally expect to see, just as right now comics aren't quite as much of a priority. Still decent sales, I'd say about average for the year, but a significant drop from November. Now, November was traditionally one of my strongest months anyway, so again, things are as I would expect. Strong sales in November, weaker sales in December, and then I generally see a pickup into the new year. So that's what I'll look for as well when I get into the new year, but I can't say until we get there. All right, so now let's talk about some trends that I saw within specific titles, because I like to look at how the big titles are performing. So I look at Amazing Spider-Man, I've combined Batman and Detective Comics, Fantastic Four, and X-Men. So the reason I picked those is those are titles that have a significant number of books generally each week that sell, and so I can see how they're performing, whereas if you've got just one or two books selling in a title, there's not necessarily a lot that you can see from that. So I've got a table that I'll put up over here, and this has all of that data together so you can see how those books are performing. And so I combine the last 2 weeks of sales into this so you can see how they've done the last 2 weeks. You see the first one on the list is Amazing Spider-Man. Definitely sells more books than every other title. I looked at 73 books over the last 2 weeks. I've combined the numbers for the 2 weeks. So I looked at 73 books for the last 2 weeks. 23 of those sold above my estimates, so that's pretty weak performance because a 50% number would be about 36 books, so we're well below that. There were 8 that sold for 20% or more above my estimate, so 8 really strong sales, and 15 that sold for 20% or less. So 15 what I would call very weak sales. Then when we go into Batman and Detective Comics, there were 18 total sales, 7 above my estimates, with just 2 that went 20% or more, and 6 that went 20% or less. So again, you can see that 7 out of 18, half would have been 9, and so if things were trending up with Batman Detective Comics, I would expect to see 9 or more, and if things are trending down, less. And so we're at 7, so again, weak sales for Batman. Then we've got Fantastic Four, which has been relatively weak for a while. It was one of the really strong titles earlier this year, so it's not a big surprise that there's been some drops in it. Total of 27 books, just 8 going above my estimate. So half would have been around 13 or 14, so definitely some weakness there, but you can see not any really big extremes. Only 1 book selling for over 20% above my estimates, and just 3 books selling for 20% or more below my estimate. And so, yeah, the sales were relatively weak, just 8 out of 27 exceeding my estimates, but in general, they're falling within that pretty tight range around my estimate for those books. No real big outliers. All right, and then the last one is X-Men. 35 total books that I looked at, just 12 sold above my estimate. So again, would have expected about 17 or 18 if things were performing around what I would have estimated for the prices of those books. So again, quite a bit below that, down at 12. And again, not too extreme on the high or low end with these. We had 4 books that went for 20% or more above, so 4 on that kind of high end, and then 8 that sold for 20% or more below. So that one is a little more extreme. That's a little over 20% of those books selling for those more extreme low prices. So you can see just in general for the big titles, yeah, not very strong sales. Everything was less than 50% of my estimates. So in general, weak numbers, I would say, for those major titles, but nothing that I would call really extreme on the low or high end. If you had to pick one, the weakest one was Batman and Detective Comics, with a little over 30% of those books selling for 20% or more below my estimates. But in general, nothing that really stands out on the high end or the low end. So what are my takeaways overall from all of this information? Right now, I still see Golden Age is very strong, trending down a little bit over the last couple weeks, but still way outperforming, especially all the other ages, for both exceeding my estimates and the high sales. All the other ages generally tend to look weak right now, but there are those pockets of strength that I've talked about where you have, little things like the Kingpin reveal, and so that's spiking books like Amazing Spider-Man 50 and 51, that kind of thing. You see those little pockets of strength, but not the overall market strength. And then within the key runs, just general weakness across the board. Amazing Spider-Man, Batman, Fantastic Four, X-Men, really generally underperforming overall, which not a huge surprise around this time of year. This is the time, as I was saying, try to find those deals. If there are big books you're looking for, key books within those runs, this is your opportunity where you might be able to pick them up at a discount compared to other times of the year. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. For some specific surprising sales, check out my top 10 videos where I go over the top 5 most surprising on the high end and top 5 most surprising on the low end. If you did enjoy this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.